She laughed right through the kitchen door and said, "People like me only stayed because we had nowhere else to go." I was holding a dish towel. I didn't walk out. I didn't say a word. I just waited because I already knew something she didn't. Have you ever overheard something about yourself that you weren't supposed to hear and just stood there, not sure if you should walk out or stay hidden? My name is Kayla Wright, 68 years old. I live in Cedar Key, Florida, in a weathered little cottage about 3 streets back from the water. The kind of place where the screen door never quite latches right and the floorboards have opinions about the weather. I've lived here most of my adult life, and for most of that time, I thought that was enough, more than enough. That night at the community hall, standing behind that kitchen door with a dish towel in both hands, I started to wonder if I'd been wrong about that. If you've ever had a moment like that, where someone reduces your whole life to a punchline, stay with me, because this story doesn't end behind that door. I used to own a diner on Dock Street. Harbor Spoon, nothing fancy. The stools had a squeak to them, the pie case fogged up every summer, and the coffee could wake the dead on their worst day. Fishermen came in before sunrise. Retirees camped at the counter for 2 hours over 1 cup. It smelled like salt air and bacon grease in a way that stuck to your hair. For a long time, that diner was the whole center of my life, especially after the hurricane of '93. People still talk about that storm around here when the weather radio starts up late at night. Roofs gone like paper, boats sitting in the middle of State Road 24, church basements packed with wet blankets, and people staring at the floor because they genuinely didn't know what came next. I cooked for 6 weeks straight, sometimes in the diner kitchen, sometimes in the church fellowship hall when downtown lost power for days at a stretch. Seafood stew, scrambled eggs, grilled cheese, whatever I could stretch from donated supplies and dented cans. I stopped counting what I was losing around week 2 because the math stopped being the point. People were hungry. That was the only math that mattered. I never thought I was doing anything heroic. Most women my age were raised to just handle things. You cooked the meals, you paid the bills, you sat beside hospital beds at 2 in the morning and didn't complain about it. You held families together with phone calls nobody ever thanked you for. Did anyone in your life just quietly hold things together like that and you only realized it years later? You just did it. That was the whole job description. Bram was a boy back then. He used to sit on the diner counter and swing his legs while I worked the grill, stealing fries off each plates when customers weren't looking. The fishermen all knew his name. Old Mrs. Boone from the bakery used to pass him cinnamon rolls through the kitchen window. He looked at me, back then, like I was something worth looking at. Things shifted after Lennox came in. Slowly, the way a tide goes out, you don't notice until you're already standing on wet sand wondering where the water went. It started small. Bram asking if I'd ever thought about selling the cottage while the market was good. Lennox walking through my kitchen, trailing perfume that probably cost more than my monthly grocery run, saying Cedar Key had potential if people stopped clinging to the past. I laughed it off. I even offered her peach cobbler. The truth is, I wanted her to like me, probably more than I should have. When you lose your husband and your child grows into his own life, you start making these quiet trades, staying close over staying respected. I hate saying that out loud, but it's true. I did that for years. Do you think there's ever a point where we stop wanting our children's approval, or does that just never really go away? The fundraiser planning meeting was a Tuesday night, 7 o'clock. I walked in carrying 2 trays of napkins and found Lennox already sitting at the center table, like she'd bought the building, color-coded packets at every chair, glossy paper, words like branding and tourism outreach and elevated guest experience. I sat down in one of those metal folding chairs, the kind that bites into your back after 20 minutes, and felt like a stranger in a room I'd spent half my life working in. Lennox stood near the projector in a cream blazer that probably cost more than my diner's electric bill for a month. She talked about modernizing Cedar Key's image, attracting younger visitors, investors. I tried to keep an open mind. Small towns change. I know that. But everything she said sounded less like improving the place and more like replacing it. She wanted to pull dated traditions from the fundraiser schedule, less hurricane history, more forward thinking development. She even suggested swapping out the seafood buffet for catered hors d'oeuvre because, and I'm not making this up, tourists expected elevated presentation now. I heard Mrs. Boone make a sound beside me, not a gasp, not even a sigh, just a small noise that meant, oh no. When Thayer Quinn asked about the food table, I cleared my throat and said people looked forward to familiar things. Crab chowder, cornbread, the dishes tied to the town's actual history. Lennox smiled at me before she responded. That almost made it worse than if she hadn't. She said nostalgia had its place, warm, like she was complimenting a child. But Cedar Key needed to stop behaving like a retirement scrapbook if it wanted to survive. A couple people laughed into their styrofoam cups, the nervous kind. Then she said, communities struggled when older generations refused to step aside long enough for progress to happen. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have said something, or would you have just sat there like I did? Nobody spoke. A chair scraped. Ice shifted in someone's cup. I looked over at Bram. He was rubbing his thumb along the edge of his coffee lid, staring at the table like the table had done something to him. He didn't say a word. I kept folding napkins in my lap. The whole drive home, my hands smelled like the cheap hand soap from the community hall bathroom. I got home and didn't want to go inside. I just sat in the car for a while with the engine off. The church parking lot across the street had a crack running down the center of it that filled with rainwater when it stormed. And that night, it was reflecting the streetlights in broken pieces. I stared at it longer than made any sense. When I finally went in, the kitchen looked exactly like it always did. Bills on the refrigerator, weather radio blinking near the sink, Bram's old baseball photo in the corner of the pantry mirror. But something felt different. I thought it was the house at first. Around 9:30, I unlocked the storage room connected to the old diner space. I told myself I needed a tablecloth box. I knew that wasn't really why I was in there. Dust moved through the flashlight beam. Cardboard boxes stacked against the walls. I started opening them, VHS tapes labeled Hurricane Shelter, Polaroids curled from the humidity, recipe books with handwritten measurements in blue ballpoint ink, and photographs, dozens of them. Morel Boone asleep against a church wall with her shoes still on. Children eating soup from paper bowls while rain hammered the windows. Bram at 12 years old carrying a stack of grilled cheese sandwiches almost too heavy for his arms. And me younger, exhausted. Hair shoved under a bandana, smiling anyway. I sat there on the concrete floor until my knees started aching, which at 68 doesn't take long. I'd let myself believe somewhere along the way that those years had expired. That kindness had a shelf life. That getting older meant quietly clearing yourself out of the way while younger people decided what still had value. Sitting on that floor, I realized that belief had done more damage to me than Lennox ever could. The phone rang upstairs. 10:15. A woman introduced herself as Odessa Vane from the Cedar Key Gazette. When a stranger calls and says they've been looking for you specifically, what does that feel like? What do you think she wanted? Odessa's office sat above the old bait shop near the marina, wedged between a tax service and a tourist shop that sold seashell wind chimes. The whole place smelled like dust and printer ink and old paper that had been baking under Florida heat for a long time. Stacks of newspapers on every surface, some of them looking genuinely structural. She said she'd been gathering stories about people who helped Cedar Key survive after the hurricane. For the fundraiser tribute. I laughed and told her she probably wanted someone more important. She looked at me over the top of her reading glasses and said half the town had mentioned my name before she even finished her first round of interviews. She led me to a back room, slid a VHS tape into a machine that hummed and clicked like it was waking from a long sleep. The footage came on grainy, rain, floodwater. Then suddenly, there I was on the screen, 25 years younger, standing behind folding tables inside the church basement, stirring soup while volunteers moved around me. I put my hand over my mouth. It wasn't seeing myself young that got to me. It was the expression on my face. I looked tired right down into my bones, but I also looked certain, like I knew exactly where I was supposed to be standing. Then Odessa handed me a cassette recorder with headphones. She'd spent the past month interviewing longtime residents. I heard fishermen, teachers, church volunteers. One man said he couldn't afford groceries for almost 2 months after the storm. A woman described watching me pay for someone else's milk and bread at the market without making a thing of it. Somebody remembered Bram carrying biscuit trays through the church hall as a little kid. I genuinely thought nobody remembered any of it. Is there something good you did a long time ago that you've almost forgotten? Something that maybe mattered more than you realized? The fundraiser night, 6:45, the community hall was packed. Tourists mixed with locals. Ceiling fans turning slow overhead smelled like seafood and coffee and wood that had been around long enough to have a smell of its own. I stood near the back wall with my Harbor Spoon apron folded over one arm, the one with the grease stains that never fully came out after the hurricane weeks. I thought about wearing something nicer. Then I stopped halfway through buttoning a blouse and put the apron over my arm instead. I was done being embarrassed by the things that built me. The lights went down. Old footage filled the screen. The room went quiet in that specific way. Rooms go quiet when people see their own past looking back at them. When the footage showed 12-year-old Bram and his tower of grilled cheese sandwiches, the whole room laughed soft and warm. I looked over at my son. His face had changed completely. All that careful, polite distance was gone. He looked stunned, like he'd forgotten entire rooms of his own childhood and was only now finding them again. Lennox sat beside him, still, nothing to say. Then Odessa read the letter. Clara Bissett had passed away 8 years earlier. Her daughter found the letter while going through her things and brought it to the newspaper office when she heard about the tribute. Clara had come to the shelter with 2 children. No power at home, barely enough money for diapers. She wrote about feeling ashamed every single time she accepted another bowl of soup. Then she wrote something I didn't even remember doing. She said every Friday night, after most volunteers had left, I quietly packed leftover food into paper sacks and told parents there was too much extra so they could carry meals home to their kids without having to feel like charity. I didn't remember that, not until Odessa read it out loud. If someone wrote a letter like that about you, about something you did without thinking much of it, what do you think they'd say? Bram had both hands pressed against his mouth. His shoulders shook once. He didn't look at me. I understood that too. Some grief is too big to hold up in public. Lennox looked pale, not defensive, just aware. Sometimes that's heavier than anything. When Odessa asked if I wanted to say something, I stood up slowly. My knees have their own commentary these days, still holding the apron. I said I never expected to be recognized for feeding hungry people, because that was just what you did. Then I said the thing I hadn't planned on saying. I said I'd spent too many years apologizing for taking up space in rooms I helped build. That was all. No speech. Just the truth, out loud, finally. A few months later, Bram and Lennox moved into a smaller place near Gainesville. The waterfront condo turned out to be well outside their budget. Bram calls now on Sunday evenings, usually around 7. Sometimes we talk for 20 minutes, sometimes 5. But the conversations feel like actual conversations, which is more than I can say for a long stretch of years. Lennox started volunteering at the community kitchen. Nobody asked her to. I think she avoided me the first few times, still carrying the embarrassment around. I didn't push. Boundaries were something I learned late, but I learned them. There's a framed newspaper clipping in my hallway now from the fundraiser. Most evenings, I sit in the rocking chair near the screen door with the apron folded on the side table and the weather radio going low in the background. So, here's what I want to ask you. Is there something you did years ago that you've quietly stopped counting as part of who you are? A time you showed up when it cost you something and you've never really let yourself be proud of it? Think about that, because sometimes the most important things we've done are the ones we somehow forgot to keep. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that the years behind them still count. And come back next time, because the next story starts in a parking lot at 2 in the morning. And it changed everything I thought I knew about forgiveness.